The following are highlights of Foundations for Freedom with Greg Pinio, brought to you by Reach Returns.
Well, I would like to start today by letting you know that this series, Foundations for Freedom, will be building off of our Wisdom for Wealth seminar, our Wisdom for Wealth CD. And so a lot of the points that we're going to be covering here, we will touch on the highlight films of those again, but certainly not go into depth and begin building an advanced picture, if you will. That's what today is about. We build this seminar out as terms squared, a deeper understanding of the terms of real estate. And yet, understanding those terms, it all starts with understanding in a deeper way the foundational parts of what we're talking about. What I want to underline and start with is this whole notion that the topic of terms starts with an understanding that the seller, we're not going to have a deal, ever, unless we construct something that makes sense to the seller. So with that premise, understanding the seller becomes a huge component in our ability to negotiate something that works. It seems so obvious, and yet in the normal real estate world, what just cracks me up is that offers are written every day without the buyer ever having any knowledge whatsoever of the seller. Only that this property is listed, here's the price, that's it. Nothing beyond that. I couldn't imagine sitting down to construct a purchase and sale agreement to purchase a piece of property with only that knowledge. That would be like being blindfolded, throwing darts at balloons on a wall. Your likelihood of getting something that really is negotiated to where it is a win-win with seller and buyer is a small chance. And so my version of this starts with developing in some way a relationship with the seller to where a door opens itself and we start collecting clues, a puzzle. We start the process with all the pieces of the puzzle face down. And one at a time, by our observation, by the questions we're asking, we start flipping over these puzzle pieces and then begin the process of solving this puzzle in a way that becomes a win-win. So let's just think logically about the questions we would want to know the answers to that would help us formulate our offer and why. Okay? Let's start with an obvious question of how long have these people owned this property? Why would I want to know that? Let's go through 100 reasons. No, how about just a couple? First of all, if they've owned this property for 20 years versus if they've owned it for a year, I can assume certain things that I couldn't otherwise. I can assume that they at least have the potential of having equity in this property. And as we go on, we'll find that very specifically, I'm going to ask them how much do they owe on this property to determine what kind of equity they have. It's critical. I need to know that. But also, how long they've been there speaks to the emotional issues of what has happened here? What are their emotional ties here? Have they raised their family here? Did somebody die here? What significantly in their life, if they've lived there for 20 years, has happened while this place was the center point of that activity? I need to know that. I could think of many, many examples, but let's go to one that just I'll never forget. Walking through a very simple 3-bedroom, 1-bath Rambler. Lady calls. She wants to sell her home. I absolutely say, I'm very interested. I'd like to meet her there in her home and walk through it with her and talk. Well, the main reason I want to meet her in her home, segue, is because by being in her home, about 80% of the clues that I'm wanting to know are going to be apparent to me just by being in her space. It's why I never meet at Denny's or, the local restaurant. Certainly never at my office or my own residence, because that's giving all the clues about me away. I want to collect clues, not give clues. Well, anyway, there I am in this residence. And I usually say something to the effect that, well, Edna, you've lived in this house for a long time. I bet you know your way around. Why don't you be the tour guide? Okay, well, come on, I'll give you the tour. It's really a pretty simple house, but this tour starts here. This is the living room, obviously. This is the kitchen. And along the way, I'm noticing things and I'm asking and having answered questions along the way. Boy, this is real nice. When did you do this remodeling? Oh, actually, I built those cabinets myself. You see, what does that tell me? Here's a 75-year-old lady who built the cabinets herself. That's a significant part. These are just not your normal cabinets. And even if they look like dog meat, understand she built them herself, and that's significant. So we go down the hallway. You've seen them, 3-bedroom, 1-bath ramblers. Bathroom on the left, biggest bedroom down the hall on the left, small bedroom in the right corner, smaller bedroom on the hallway on the right side. Well, I'm just about ready, because of the hall tightness of space, to open the door in the back right corner of the bedroom. I go for the handle, and she exclaims, "No, don't go in there. Don't go in there. You can't go in there." And I, of course, let go of the handle. "Oh, I'm sorry." And I just didn't say anything, but that silence led to, I've never gone in that room. That was my son's room. My son was killed in Vietnam. That door hasn't been open since I got the news. Now, let me ask you, is this an issue that is going to have to be dealt with in order for me to purchase this home, either fix it up and sell it or keep it as a rental? All of a sudden, I'm going to need to be sensitive to this issue. If we don't find a way to talk about this and work through it and deal with it, there is no chance of buying that property. None. Zero. Think back to the normal real estate world. Here's what I'm going to give you for your property. It's an all-cash deal. I'm going to get a bank loan and possession on closing. Does that really work for this lady? Is that being sensitive to the heart of the matter? And if you could address that issue and do it sensitively, do you think that perhaps that might be a more important issue than $5,000 of purchase price? So knowing this seller, knowing who we're talking with, I'm going to ask them questions like, what do they love about the home? What do they hate about the home? If they were going to be here for 20 more years, what kinds of things would they do to the home? Okay? What is the finance situation like, the current finance situation on the home? What is their equity position? What kind of underlying loan, if they owe on the property, what kind specifically of loan is there? Did they refinance it 2 years ago? Or is this the balance of a private note with the former owner that was written up 20 years ago? All of these questions. Their family. Did they raise their family there? Do they have a family? If this is an 80-year-old lady, I want to know if she has living children. They need to be a part of this negotiation. Without question, they need to be a part. All of these issues come into it. Aristotle, way back when, sort of a seasoned veteran of the art of negotiation, said that it is the job of the persuader to develop and find all available means of persuasion. Now, persuasion, in the old text, persuasion meant agreement. In order to find agreement with all parties, we need to discover all clues that are pertinent to their life in order to come to a place of agreement. I look at every seller that has ever called me about a property that they have to sell. I look at that call as an opportunity to understand what problem it is that they're trying to solve. They're trying to do something about their life situation. This is rarely just about the money I'm going to get out of solving this. Terms understood develop and unfold as we understand what problem is it that they're trying to solve. I'll give you an example of that. I had a property where I owned the adjacent pieces, and the neighbor of mine knew that I was in the sport of real estate, and thinking that I might know of somebody who might be interested in his property, he called me just to say, we are going to sell our property. As it turned out, I had a great interest in wanting to get the property simply for privacy reasons, that I didn't really want a neighbor there. This is a vacation property that I have up towards Stevens Pass. And so when he said, I'm going to sell, my next question is, why are you thinking of selling? And the answer was that we have recently moved out by Crystal Mountain, and so using our vacation property near Stevens Pass likely isn't going to happen. If we're going to go skiing, we're going to go to Crystal Mountain because it's so close. Okay. Is that it? Of course not. What do you owe on the property? Oh, free and clear. Tell me about what you're trying to solve by selling this property. Well, I just need all cash because there's things I want to do with the money that I need to do. What do you need to do? Now, see, right there, I can just feel the mortified looks of people who are somewhat shy about asking direct questions. But without direct questions, you're not going to get direct answers. And without direct answers, you're not going to have the puzzle pieces turned over that you need turned over in order to solve the equation. As it turned out, the main reason he needed all cash was that the large portion of what he needed, he wanted to buy a new vehicle. What's the next question? What kind of vehicle? Well, I'm looking at something like a Toyota 4Runner, a small SUV, good gas mileage, good condition, nothing new, of course, but a real good shape one. Really, what's my next question? What color do you like? And at this point, he's like, what are you asking me all these questions? But of course, I'm asking for a reason, because really what he wants isn't cash. What he really wants is a Toyota 4Runner of this type and shape and size and color. And as it turns out, when he said, well, I don't know, something simple, white, black, something like that. As it turns out, I owned a white Toyota 4Runner, excellent condition, one owner, the mileage range he was looking for. And we simply gave him my 4Runner that I was planning to sell anyway as a down payment trade, credit towards a negotiated purchase price, and the balance of that deal was written up on a promissory note, 6% interest with monthly payments. So here's a seller who initially said, I need all cash for various reasons, but that really wasn't the answer. I really just need a new vehicle, and the rest I'm just going to put in the bank and make interest. Well, I have a different way. Here's the vehicle, and then I will be paying you 6% interest. Isn't that better than you can get in the bank? The terms of that transaction would not have unfolded without very, very direct questions and understanding his life situation, his reasons for selling, what his intent is in selling, what he's trying to solve, the problem he's trying to solve by selling. So this all falls under the heading of seller analysis. You'll also find that when you start taking the attitude that everything is for sale, that you will understand that there is a large section of the population that has an aversion to dealing with real estate sales people. There's an attitude out there that they're the most high-paid professionals for doing basically nothing. It's nothing for a real estate agent who sells 7 or 8 houses a year to make over $100,000 a year in commissions. Harvard Business School did a study on what is the best career opportunity for somebody with a decent business mind, taking into account office space requirements, educational requirements, capitalization requirements, startup costs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Putting all into a blender, hit the go button. What comes out? Harvard Business School study? Real estate sales. Because for, $100, 30 hours or 60 hours in a test, you can be a real estate salesperson and make a lot of income. Well, there is a population of sellers out there who have an aversion towards paying somebody 6 or 7% of the sales price for what they deem to be just a minimal amount of work. I need to know that attitude going in. I need to kind of probe and pick and understand what is their attitude towards the real estate industry. I also need to understand their sophistication level. In order to negotiate properly, I need to understand how savvy they are. Is this a one-time thing in their life, or have they bought and sold 50 pieces of real estate? If it's a one-time thing, there may be some real hand-holding involved. You may have to make them feel incredibly comfortable with you and your professionalism. You may be needing to introduce them to your accountant, your escrow person, your attorney, people who you surround yourself with so that they feel comfortable about the fact that this is going to be a professional transaction and that all of their concerns about what here, what there, how do we do this, it's all taken care of. Sizing up the seller in those terms is very, very important. Try, if at all possible, to match the seller's demeanor in your meeting with them. In other words, if you're on the phone setting up this meeting and this guy's been a truck driver for 30 years, don't show up in an Armani suit. That wouldn't work. That's going to make him feel very, very uncomfortable. If he's a truck driver, show up in jeans and a comfortable looking, sweatshirt of some kind, and let's talk house and let's talk truck driving and all other related activities. Versus if this guy's an attorney and he can only meet you at his office and he's got 15 minutes between clients, that's an entirely different scenario. You're going to want to look and act a different part. And so being somewhat of a chameleon in these scenes will improve your odds of actually landing a fish. Again, under the heading of seller analysis, we could kind of go on and on and on and on. But it's an intuition thing that happens when you are face to face with the seller. Look around. Pay attention. Do they need the money? Don't they need the money? What's their motivation? What are their attitudes, predispositions, beliefs about all kinds of things? And add it all up. And from that, you are starting to structure that unformed lump of clay in a way that makes sense and is sensitive to who they are, what they need. As we go through case studies at the end of this series, one of the biggest parts of the case study is how did the terms of the transaction come about? How did they unfold? And they will always, the answer to that question is always that they unfolded based on some knowledge or some puzzle piece, some discovery about the seller and their situation that you picked up on, that you offer up as being a part of the deal that is sensitive to their situation, that they go, perfect. That solves it for me. Oh, good. You mean I don't have to move out in 90 days? Perfect. You mean I'm not going to have to pay a bunch of money to an agent to sell this home? Perfect. You mean I can close it and actually rent back from you for a period of time? Perfect. You mean you're going to handle these tenants who are driving me nuts and threatening to sue me, that you're going to relieve all of that pressure and all that anxiety from me as part of this deal? I don't have to worry about that or think about that? Perfect. You mean I don't have a big capital gains bill at the end of the transaction if we do it this way? Perfect. You see, all of these thoughts, concerns, anxieties that sellers have, you're going to pick up on them and you're going to address those things in your structuring of an offer, because that's how you're going to get to have the deal done. Okay, seller analysis. If real estate investing is going to be your sport, you need to commit to it. Anybody that is a world-class athlete in their sport trains every single day. They train. They work out. It's not the most enjoyable part of what they do. It's not game time. There isn't a big crowd there clapping. But if they don't do that, they will never perform on game day. Knowing a selling price, a price you are willing to pay, is prefaced by your hard work and research. On a daily basis, you need to be looking at properties. Primarily, all those properties in the area of like kind that have sold recently. Once you get brought up to speed, staying up to speed is not a difficult task. But if you're just starting out, you need to get a last 8, 10, 12-month list of everything sold in your area. If you're wanting to buy a single-family home, you need to understand every single-family home sold in that area in your price range, and you need to be able to drive by it, point to it, and tell me everything there is to know about it. When it sold, how much it sold for, how it was financed, how many bedrooms, bathrooms, square feet it is, what's the price that person paid per square foot for that property, what kind of condition is it in, what style is it, what's the lot size, etc., etc., etc. You need to become an expert on value. You also need to know everything that's on the market, listed, and what are they asking? Now, that's less important than understanding solds. Solds means somebody was ready, willing, and able to perform on this transaction. It actually closed. You can ask anything you want on a listed property. It doesn't reflect value until it's sold. All right? So that homework is absolutely imperative. If you don't do that, do not go out and invest in real estate. You'll make a mistake. You will make a mistake. Real estate has 2 gears. Forward, fast moving, reverse, fast moving. I know just as many people who have lost their butt in real estate as those who have made money. Everybody assumes all you have to do is buy real estate and just do nothing and wake up about 2 years later and you'll make a bunch of money. Not true. Not true. There are people every day who lose their shirt. And one of the reasons I feel that they lose their shirt is that they're not educated. No value. Know it in, out, left, and right. Every day of my life, some seller says to me, I want $400,000 for this house. And in my mind, I know I can only pay $200,000 for it to have it make any sense whatsoever. Now, am I going to spend a lot of time slow dancing with this particular situation? Likely not. I'm going to kind of get to the chase. Now, if they said they wanted $240 and I know I could pay $200 and do very well, I'm slow dancing, right? We're close enough to where I'm going to start investing some time, some effort, some energy. I'm going to start slow dancing. I'm going to start asking my questions. If we're $200,000 apart, I'm going to kind of cut to the chase real quick and say, boy, I think you're on a different planet. Here's in the range of what I could do for you. If we're talking in that range, let me know. Here's my number. And I get on with it. Remember, my version is not a volume sport. If I buy 5, 6, 7, 8 properties a year and do them right, I'm happy. I'm really happy. Not to say there haven't been years where we've bought a couple a month, but you make your money on the buy. Selling is only a reflection of did you buy correctly. Every dime you ever make in real estate, and I would say most investments, is on the buy. And so in order to buy correctly, you have to know value. A hint, and I throw it out there as just a hint, sometimes a place to start, is tax assessed value. You're going to immediately, when you have a property you're interested in, you're going to get the full property profile from the title company. And on that profile, it's going to break down its tax assessed value in land and structure and a total of what the tax assessor says it's worth. Something that I asked the title company to do for me that helps me stay educated as to what that tax assessed value number represents is I ask for them to provide to me a correlation, a ratio, if you were, about tax assessed value as it relates to sold value of properties. And I want to understand a percentage relationship because that relationship changes over time. 5 years ago, it would be safe to say that sold prices were always significantly higher than tax-assessed values. But if you were to make that same statement today as we speak in December of 2003, at least in the Seattle area, no longer is that true. Matter of fact, there's properties listed all over the city for sale under their current tax-assessed value. So it is a measure. But it's a measure that you need to look at it and understand still what's happening in the marketplace so that this bit of information is a valuable piece of information for you. So under the heading of terms, we highlight the fact that we need to understand the seller. All right? Once we start collecting these puzzle pieces, we try to frame them and categorize these bits of knowledge under the heading of what are the negotiable terms in a purchase and sale agreement. Somehow all of this knowledge we have now about the seller, their situation, their life, what they're trying to solve, et cetera, it has to now plug into a written purchase and sale agreement about this property. Okay? And so as we're collecting these puzzle pieces, we need to file these bits of knowledge under the headings that they can apply. All right? For example, purchase price is certainly one of the negotiable terms. How much are we going to pay? Now, as we talk more and more about acquisition of properties, we'll understand that on a property that we're intending to hold long term, purchase price, albeit important, is certainly not the most important term. But it is a negotiable term. It's something that we have to agree on. And so, how do we arrive at that? There's one negotiable term. Down payment. How do we arrive at a down payment? Now, let's tell stories along the way. I've dealt with sellers who absolutely have no need for money whatsoever. None. Zero. If you put $1 million in their account, it wouldn't change their life in the slightest. However, out of principle, they are not going to write a check at closing, right, to sell their own property. They're going to need enough down to at least pay their closing costs. Now, that would be, a wonderful scenario if you could buy a property for what the seller's closing costs are down. What are the seller's closing costs? And can you calculate that so that your offer, even though they've told you we don't need anything down, just closing costs, you're going to need to be able to calculate that. What is that? How much is that? Of course, when in doubt, call escrow. Say, here's the purchase price. What are the seller's closing costs? And they'll give you an exact number. However, on your feet, you need to be able to calculate those things. Sellers almost always pay for state excise tax. They always are providing the buyer with title insurance. Everything beyond that truly is negotiable. However, usually they pay for half of escrow and then all of the proration of taxes, et cetera, et cetera. Again, a number, how much down am I going to put, needs to come from somewhere. It needs to, so if seller says to you, all I'm really trying to do out of this thing is I want to pay off this credit card and I want to go on a trip around the world. You need to hear, how much is that? Because in order to do this deal, they're going to need their closing costs down, whatever it's going to cost to pay off their credit card, and whatever it costs to do a trip around the world, you're going to have to get a sense of that in order to put an offer in front of them that, again, gets them to where they're going. Down payment is all a function of what is it going to take to get the seller where they're going. Cash-wise. Understand that a lot of sellers are trying to get places, but those places don't require cash to get there. They might require income stream to get there. They might require all sorts of other things. But think in those terms. Next negotiable term is, what about the balance? Is this something that we're going to be able to involve the seller in, the financing? Read this. Whenever possible, you want to, in all or in part, involve the seller in the financing. Why? Let's talk about that for a second. We're going to be financing this property somehow. Okay? If we go to a bank and borrow the money, we have just signed up for the bank's way or the highway. Our input into the structuring of the terms of that promissory note, that IOU, is going to be next to zero influence on how that note reads. Versus if we're dealing with the seller, we have a myriad of ideas and possibilities that can come into play as far as the structuring of that promissory note. What does it say? What options, what doors are open for us in the future? Once we sign a bank note, we have signed up for their way or the highway. It's this much a month. It's this payment terms. If it's an adjustable note, it adjusts on this day, per this margin, per this rate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's all structured, laid out for us. It's their way. Understand that all of those features are negotiable when we're dealing with a private note holder, in this case, the seller. Okay? So whenever possible, we're going to try to involve the seller in the financing. As we talk about selling our property at the end of this CD, we'll understand too that the options and the possibilities that are at our disposal when it comes time to sell are largely a function of what we have on our current underlying note. In other words, how well did we do when we bought it in structuring terms? If you buy with a bank note and you get your bank loan, when you go to sell, let's say 4 years from now, is your note assumable? No. Is it wrappable? No. It likely is due on sale. If you have a 5-year balloon on your note with the bank and you want to extend it, do you think you're going to get to do that for free? No. You'll be paying for that. Will you be qualifying again to get it? Yes. All of these terms that we set up day one also give us options on sale day. I want to be able to sell my note for a minimum amount down and involve myself with the financing as the seller without necessarily having to cash out my negotiated terms. Okay? And we'll talk about that as we get down the road with some case studies. I want my good terms to be an asset that is an asset as great as the property itself. People think in terms of, when they're buying an asset, they think in terms of the house, the land that it sits on, or the building and the land that it sits on, that's what they're buying. I want you to think in terms of two categories. What I have to sell are the negotiated terms that I have worked out and the property and the land it sits on. Two separate things. Two separate entities. They need to be thought of separately. I'll give you an example. let's say I bought a house for $200,000 and I paid $10,000 down, and I have a promissory note for $190,000, an IOU. I owe the seller, let's call him Bill. I owe Bill $190,000. But I've negotiated a 30-year amortized note at 4.5% interest. And I've negotiated that because he's told me all he needs to get him where he's going in life is $850 a month. And I worked it backwards, and I added my taxes and insurance, and I determined that I could pay him 4.5% and it would get him that number. Okay? Now, let me ask you a question. I'm going to sell that house in 2 years. Do I necessarily want to sell my 4.5% 30-year amortized note? If I did sell that property with that note, doesn't the note carry value all by itself because of the terms I've negotiated? Do you see what I'm saying? That they're separate entities. Now, what if I threw into the equation that as part of my terms that I have the ability to substitute the collateral for that note? In other words, that note, instead of being secured by a deed of trust on the subject property, that at my choice, I'm the maker of the note, at the maker's choice, I can collateralize that with a different piece of property. Okay, so now it comes time to sell my property. Am I going to necessarily just get all cash and cash out Bill? No. Why would I do that? I'm either going to get significant value, additional value out of my property because of the terms I've negotiated, or I'm going to take his note, just like if I bought a brand new beautiful refrigerator, I may not sell that with the property. I may sell the property and keep my refrigerator, right? Well, in this scenario, I may sell the property and keep my terms by taking my note and collateralizing it with a different property. Why would I want to give up those beautiful terms? Now what do I owe on my subject property? Nothing. So now I'm not selling it with the terms. I'm just selling the house and the land it sits on, right? Fine, give me what that's worth. And if I agree with you, I'll sell it. Understand that my terms all by themselves have value, huge value. And that's what this day is about. We're starting to understand how to structure something where the terms all by themselves have value, where they give you options in the future, where you have a myriad of things you can do just with the terms, not to mention the structure. Okay? All right. So, purchase price, negotiable term. Down payment, certainly negotiable term. One thing we just brought up is, what is the note collateralized by? Is it collateralized by the subject property? Most of the time, that is at least where it starts. But think in terms of creating a future opportunity for yourself with what's called a substitution of security clause in your negotiation. Simply put, you could write it yourself, that the maker of the note, I'm the one, I'm the payor, I'm the maker of the note, has the ability in the future to recollateralize this note to a different property, just so the equity in that property and the cash flow in the substitute property has equity and cash flow to support the outstanding principal balance and the monthly payment. Now that's ethics, by the way. There's nothing in law that says I can't overfinance a property. But ethics says don't do that. Make sure there's equity in the property to support the outstanding balance. Make sure there's cash flow in the property that you're moving it to support the note amount, the payment amount. Okay? You never want to own a property that doesn't cover itself. let's go back to Basics 101. Remember the last CD? Why would you want to own a property whereby what you're collecting per month is not enough to pay your payment, taxes, insurance, maintenance, utilities, etc.? That's called an alligator in the real estate industry. And alligators, as far as I'm concerned, only do two things. They sneak and crawl, which is not good. They bite and kill, which is also not good. Don't have an alligator, okay? Okay, negotiable terms, purchase and sale agreement. Let's talk about closing date. A term that is just thrown out there so randomly it cracks me up. Well, when do you want to close? That question usually is one that doesn't matter all that much to normal buyers, and it should. And that question is one that most buyers assume doesn't matter to sellers, which really does matter to sellers. This one needs to be talked about. Everything comes from an example, all right? Here's a lady that's been in her house for 50 years. Do you think she's going to be out in 15 days with all her stuff? Let's close in 15 days. If she's like 99.9% of us, it's going to take about 9 moving trucks, right? And she's not going to be doing the work herself because she's 80. You're going to have to be sensitive to the process of moving. It's going to take some effort, all right? You may have to even answer the question, does this person really want to move at all? Or are they just selling this house because they need some money to solve a problem, but actually they love living here? That one's happened. Matter of fact, I think we're going to cover that case study at the end of the day, where there's really no desire to move. I just want to sell my house for other reasons. Don't assume that the reason I'm selling my house is because I want to move. Everybody assumes that. Don't assume that. From my standpoint as a buyer, I'm going to strategically pick my closing day, if at all possible, to meet my planning and my objectives. I'll give you an example. I have a property in escrow as we speak, this moment in time. Okay? Now, I could close tomorrow. Seller's ready. But I have negotiated a closing, which has been in escrow now for a month. I've negotiated not to close for another 3 weeks. Why? Why did I not want to close? Well, it's simple. For this particular property that's in escrow, I have had a cabinet subcontractor working for the last month building a laundry of cabinets for this particular property. 130 lineal running feet of cabinets. Now think about that. 130 running feet of cabinetry that's going to be installed. I can't use the property the way I want to use it until those cabinets are installed. I can't move anything into the property and put it away until those cabinets are installed. He's also building desks and file cabinets and bookcases and planning tables where you would lay out a big set of plans and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I can't function in this space that I'm buying until those cabinets are built. I can't put one thing in this space and use it until those cabinets are built. I set my closing day 2 days before, guess when, the cabinets would be done. Right? So I'm going to buy, close the property. The next day, cabinets arrive and will be installed. Why do I want to pay interest sitting there, treading water, paying taxes and insurance for a property I can't use? There's a very, very practical, now in that the seller doesn't really care when we close, anytime's fine. It does matter to me. 6 weeks of interest on a very large note is not cheap. Taxes, insurance, etc. So I'm planning my closing around when I'm really going to be ready to close. And in this case, it's when the cabinet builder's done building. Okay? One example. All right? Another reason closing day is something we need to think in terms of. income property. Let's take a 38 unit I bought on Queen Anne. Let's round it off and say there's 38 units bringing in $500 a month. Okay? So what is that? $17,500 of cash flow per month? Now, know that at closing, I'm going to get the last month's rent that's on deposit, a prorated amount of that current month's rents, all at closing. Now, I've got a seller that is representing this building as full and with great tenants who always pay their rent on time. Okay? Know that when I'm the new guy, I'm going to need to do several things immediately. So, think in these terms. When is rent due? On the 1st. If I close on the 2nd, the onus of collecting rent is on the previous owner. And he's going to have to hand over that month's rent to me at closing, which is roughly $17,500. Also, I'm going to have last month's rent that he has in deposit handed over to me. Well, now we're up to $35,000. Let's just say I negotiated a price for the building of $35,000 down. I don't need any of my own money to close this building now. It's being handed to me at closing by that month's rents and the last month's rents. So in those ways, that would be a good thing. Now, let's look at that same scenario a different way. Let's say that the day I close it, I'm going to give tenants a huge rent increase. Now, if I close it on the 29th, I will be able to get my 30-day notice out on the 30th, and therefore effectively have everybody either paying new rent or moved within 30 days. Whereas if I close on the 2nd and give them their notice, they have now 58 days to move out or pay the new month's rent, because I need to give them 30 days notice before the beginning of a rental period. Well, so you're weighing out which way do I want to go, but it isn't a random, well, let's just close this day. You're thinking about when to close based on what is your game plan with that property. Do you have the money to close it? Do you need those rents to close it? Well, then that would sort of dictate, a second of the month closing, wouldn't it? However, if your plan is, as mine was, to give everybody their, hi, my name's Greg, the party's over letter, on the 30th, I'm going to close so I can get that letter out at the last day of the month. Therefore, I've given them their 30-day notice prior to the beginning of a rental period. Now, thanks to me, at least in the city of Seattle, that particular law has changed now. That just segue, if you raise rents more than 10%, you need to give 60 days notice of your intent to raise rents. I think we'll cover that in a case study, how that law changed immediately due to one of the buildings I bought. But the bottom line is if you're going to raise rent, you got to plan on it. And you need to know landlord-tenant laws inside, outside, left, and right to know what you can and can't do. This all comes under the heading of when are we going to close? It's not a random number. It's not just something you pull out of the air. Think about it. What are your reasons to close when you want to close? What about the seller? What are they trying to do? A very close friend of mine has a property in escrow right this minute. This property doesn't close for 3 months from now. Okay? Now, on this same property, there's what's called an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, like a separate little detached structure. In this transaction, my friend, this buyer, would have wanted to close this thing like tomorrow. Would have loved to, right? Let's get in. Let's get it done. However, here you've got a seller who's been in this house for a long, long, long time. Older person. There's no way they're going to move that quickly. And so this 3-month closing is simply sensitive to the seller saying, I need at least this much time to get out of here on my terms, to have my little garage sale, to do what I'm going to do, to give away stuff. I need that much time. What my friend was able to negotiate was an early occupancy on the accessory dwelling unit. Now, early occupancy prior to the closing of the whole transaction. So now they have the ability to clean up, work on, renovate, remodel, all of that accessory dwelling property without the interest clock ticking, because they don't even own it yet. Early occupancy, another negotiable term. Early ability to start working on the property before closing, another negotiable term, something really to think about. Now understand that when you go in and start working on something before closing, and you start spending some money on it before closing, you better be damn sure you're going to close it, right? Because now you've got an investment. As well, if you don't close, you may have to put it back the way it was. But in this situation, they're very committed. They know they're going to close, and this is a way to start work on the property prior to even owning it, which is of benefit to the buyer. Seller, it worked out perfectly because they're still able to occupy the main home until they, at their terms, are able to get out. So you see, something as simple as closing date is not always simple. It needs to be handled sensitively. Okay, other negotiable terms. What goes with the sale? What comes with it? What doesn't go with it? Here's the rule of thumb on that department. You want things to go with the property that have value. Everything that it's going to cost you to haul away or get rid of or something you really don't want, you're going to try to negotiate that the seller has to have that removed prior to closing. I'll give you an example of something that falls under both categories. Okay? One category was a home that I purchased that was just full of furniture. It was a home that was inherited by siblings from their grandparents. And it was absolutely chock full of furniture. Siblings live out of state. They have no desire. This is a problem for them. This is a problem for them that this thing is full of furniture. I'm offering them something really of value to say, that's my problem. You can leave it there. I'll handle it. I'll do whatever I'm going to do with it. You don't have to worry about it. Oh, thank you. That's such a help. Well, the reason I said that's no problem is because I knew I could sell this furniture for a lot of money. So it's not like I'm just a nice guy, which I am, by the way. On the flip side of that equation, that dead car that has no wheels, that is got grass growing through the roof in the backyard, who knows if it has a title, that's a problem. I want that gone before closing at the seller's expense and the seller's effort. Matter of fact, I'm not going to close until that car is gone. All right? Now, personal property items such as these, which are what comes with the sale, the washer, the dryer, the range, the refrigerator, all of these things have to be listed separately. Understand that the person who takes these things, who gets these things, the buyer in this case, is going to have to pay state excise tax on the value of what they're receiving. And so, in a lot of cases, you can get away with saying that these items are included in the sale but have no significant value. And in a lot of cases, that will work. If they truly do have a lot of value, you're going to have to set a value number on them, and that as the buyer of these items, you're going to have to pay state excise tax on those items. No way around that. So factor that into the equation. You know, you want to be sure that what you're getting of value is worth a lot more than the tax you're going to have to pay to get them. Okay? So a simple rule of thumb, if it has value, try to get it with the property. If it doesn't have value and is a problem, see if you can get it gone. In the department of what comes with the property, what doesn't come with the property, I want to tell you a funny story because you'll remember stories and it will underline a point. landscaping is always said to go with the property unless it is clearly marked, discussed, talked about. Okay? If you're, and in this case, this was a listed property. A property that was listed, I went over, I looked at it. In my personal opinion, it was priced way under what it should have been. But see, I'm under no obligation to educate anybody at this point. It's listed. So I simply wrote up an offer. Here it is. I'll buy the property. In the front yard of this property, the centerpiece of this house was a huge, gorgeous, I'm not a landscape person, but I can describe it to you. It's a red-leafed, sort of droopy, velvety-leafed, Japanese-looking tree. And it looks like a bonsai tree, only it's about 10 feet wide and not very tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet tall, with these very velvety, purplish, maroon-colored leaves on this thing. Gorgeous, gorgeous tree. Huge. In the front yard. A day before it's scheduled to close, I drove by the property en route to another meeting, and I just about drove off the road because right there in the front yard is a hole that is as big as a moon crater. It's 5 feet deep and about 10 feet around, and this beautiful tree that was the centerpiece of this front yard is gone. Gone. I was shocked, of course. I called the listing agent who listed the property, and I will keep them nameless. And I said, hey, what happened to that beautiful tree in the front yard? And the answer was, the sellers wanted to take that to a golf course that they're members of and put it on one of the tees as sort of a memorabilia giveaway to their golf course. I said, well, isn't that nice? That's wonderful. I think that's very thoughtful of them. However, nothing was said in the listing about them taking this tree. Nothing is a part of this purchase and sale agreement that says that this tree is marked and will be going with the sellers. There's no mention of this. And as you know and I know, landscaping is always a part of the transaction unless otherwise named. The comment I got back was, Greg, this is just going to be another rental house of yours. What do you care how it's landscaped? Well, that got me a little fired up. And I told this person, who happened to be leaving in about an hour for her vacation in Hawaii, already spending her commission before it actually closed, by the way, that this was an issue that had to be addressed before closing or I wouldn't close. She thought I was kidding, got on a flight, took off to Hawaii. The next day was supposed to be closing day. Escrow called me, said things are ready to sign, and I simply said, well, as I've told this particular listing agent, I'm not signing until this issue is addressed. Listing agent's broker calls me, says, what's the problem? I clearly laid out what the problem was. He couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe that this happened. I said, you just need to just humor yourself and drive by the house. You'll see exactly what I mean. And by the way, I have a picture of this house the day I bought it, just because I always seem to do that. And I'll show you what was there so you don't think it's just some little scrubby bush. Well, he saw this crater in the front yard. He couldn't believe it. Nothing in the paperwork. And what we negotiated was that this particular agent's entire commission would sit in escrow, not to be removed until this problem was solved to my satisfaction. Well, in that I didn't take a commission on this. In other words, she got both sides of the commission, the listing and the selling commission. There was, $7,000 or $8,000 sitting there in escrow, which I felt was probably enough to solve the problem. And so I closed the deal with the agreement that that money stayed frozen. agent comes back now from Hawaii, from vacation, expecting to walk into the office and have a big fat commission check sitting on her desk. And of course, there's no commission, and there's this agreement signed by me and her broker that the money stays frozen until we agree on how to solve it. She calls very mad, and I said, no, actually, I just want either that exact bush back, or I want one exactly what was there, which I have no idea where you might find one of those. She says, well, you go by this afternoon. I'll have it replaced by this afternoon. I want that commission released. I said, fine, just call me when it's ready to go by and look, and I'll look. And I'm thinking, there is no way in the world. Well, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, because I got a call about 4 o'clock this afternoon that it was ready to go. And I said, great, I'll just drive up there and take a look. And I drove up there, and sitting at the base of this cavern, in the bottom of the hole, is a 1-gallon rhododendron, about 18 inches tall. I honestly thought somebody was just screwing with me. Like, this will get a reaction. Like, there must be hidden cameras around here, so I'm not going to give anybody the reaction they think they're going to get. I just start laughing. Call up the agent, and I'm laughing on the phone. I said, my God, I didn't realize you had such a sense of humor. That's really funny. He says, what are you laughing about? I've replaced it. It'll grow. I said, well, first of all, you're not serious. Oh, she's dead serious. She did her due diligence in replacing a bush of similar kind. That's how she thought was going to solve the problem. And of course, I informed her this was not solving anything. And here's how we solved the problem. I took it upon myself to call a nursery, a commercial nursery in town. They scanned the globe. We found out exactly what this thing was by the picture. They scanned the globe, and we found one at a place that only deals in very large, mature landscaping. And the ticket for this thing, I don't remember the exact number, but it was over $5,000 to have this tree brought in and planted properly, and et cetera, et cetera. Well, when I showed her approximately what this was going to cost to replace it to meet my satisfaction, she just hit the roof. No way will I do that. We will go to brokerage service arbitration over this. The multiple listing service in that area, we're going to go to their arbitration. They'll decide. There's no way. I just looked at this as like one of the most enjoyable days of my life. Please. Oh, that will be so fun to watch you stand among a panel of real estate brokers and pull down your pants and do the hokey pokey, because that's what it's going to happen. I can't believe you're wanting to even let this out. But if you do, if it's your choice, oh gosh, please make the date. And she did. And we went. And the pants came down immediately. And she lost her real estate license. Ooh, ow. Should have just replaced the tree. Okay, now you'll never forget that landscaping always comes with the transaction unless it is very specifically addressed. Okay? Case in point.
This is the end of Disc 1. Highlights continue on Disc 2.